Thanks for joining us. I'm Len Kiese. In honor of Black History Month, CBS News Bay Area invited some members of our local community here for a roundtable discussion to talk about their roles and also some of the unique challenges they faced as leaders. Here now is Bishop Bob Jackson, Kymberly Miller, Tamearra Dyson, Nicco Adams, Jason Seals, Greg Hodge, and Brandi Summers. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
So good to have all of you. Let's get to know you a little first. Let's start with Bishop Bob Jackson from Acts Full Gospel Church. You've been a pastor now for almost 40 years, and you do so much for people and for your city. Tell us what inspired you to do exactly what you're doing today.
Wow. How much time do I have? Anyway,
As time as you need.
what inspired me is actually where I come from. I guess my roots, my beginning. I've been in Oakland 76 years. I was born in Berkeley, but I was raised in Oakland. And my dad he came out of the Navy, 41. And I was born in 45, but my dad couldn't get a job. He had a hard time. And so we lived in the projects, Camel Village, 895 Camel Village Court there, as a matter of fact, in West Oakland. And he was an elevator operator, and my mother cleaned rich folks' houses. And he got a raise finally, and we moved to Brookfield Village, and where I grew up, and went to school, of course, Prescott, West Oakland, then Lowell. And when we moved, I went to Elmhurst, graduated from Castlemont. So I'm here because I know how it is and how it was to grow up in the inner city, and especially in what we considered in those days it was a neighborhood. Today it's just hood. But anyway, I knew what it was like to grow up. And so I wanted to go back and help the people that are left behind. The Lord blessed me to go to Merritt College and got my AA, and then went to go on got a BA from Cal State Hayward, and then I have a master's degree. But I wanted to go back and help the people that are left behind. And I still have that in my heart, because so many wonderful, beautiful people, they just need a little help. And today we have so many selfish people. All they're concerned about is me and mine, but they don't seem to have the love that God intended for us to have for one another, to be able to come back and help somebody that's less fortunate than you. And to sum it up is simply this: if you find out the Bible says more blessed to give than it is to receive, you'll find out you get more blessings by helping other people than you do from helping yourself. So that's my motivation. It's been my motivation now, pastoring Acts Full Gospel, like you said, almost 40 years, 38 years to be exact, this year. And looking forward to just doing all I can to help the community, help my city, and help Oakland be the great city that I knew it was when I grew up. And when I grew up, we didn't even lock the doors, Len, because you didn't have to lock the doors. And if somebody needed something, just knock on the door and ask if they borrow a cup of sugar or whatnot. I mean, we were real neighbors. Now we don't even know who lives next door. It's really sad.
Maybe we can get back to that point again.
That's my prayer.
Thank you so much. And Kimberly Miller is the Executive Director of Children's Fairyland. We've spoken to you several times as well, especially now during the pandemic. You spent the past 2 years plus dealing with the COVID roller coaster at Children's Fairyland. How did you manage to navigate all of those challenges, and what does it mean to you to be able to serve as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, navigating COVID-19 for everybody has been a huge challenge. So I'm no different. As a person of color running an organization such as Children's Fairyland, an Oakland institution, it brings with it a lot of expectation, a little bit of drama, a little bit of, all of that. And it, as a person of color, I feel like, from my personal experience, we have to navigate. There isn't a choice to not navigate, right? So we're really trained often to say, what's the next step? I'm in this corner. How do I get out of it? So for me, it was instinct and really out of this is what I must do, as opposed to, do I have a choice to do this or not? It was more that I have to figure out how to help Fairyland march its way through the pandemic. How is it going to come back fully solvent and ready to engage the community again and kind of almost renew itself? I mean, so I took this opportunity to really dig into Fairyland. I'd only been here 7 months before the pandemic hit as the executive director. So it was definitely a tall order. But I had to pull on all of my resources. And I think as people of color, we have those kinds of reserves just because it's been baked into our DNA. And so really for me, I wanted to dig into Fairyland and really find the resources necessary and protect the staff and help them navigate through the pandemic, as well as emerge as a safe place to recreate for families and their little people. So I was really excited and happy to be able to do that. And I credit that to, not only to who I am, but how I was brought up and also my education. I went to Mills College. So I went to a women's college. One of the, Mills is about to be sunset as that. And I'm very sad about that. But I think that gave me a lot of strength and resources and resilience to pull Fairyland through as well.
Yeah, we kind of figure out how to just make it work, right? Absolutely. And Nicco Adams is a young entrepreneur from San Jose. You say you are transforming sneaker culture, right? Tell
Absolutely.
us what that means and what message do you have for other young Black entrepreneurs out there?
Absolutely. So right now, I'm the co-founder of an app called Kickstroid, and I don't handle the programming side, but what I do handle is the business side, marketing, things like that. And so David's my co-founder, noticed a big change in the sneaker space not too long ago. And we figured that we could kind of fill that gap. So right now we're at a place where you don't have to be considered a sneakerhead or somebody who camps out for shoes in order to buy a new pair of shoes or want a new pair of shoes. So we said we can step in and really develop a platform using machine learning and different things that can pretty much help somebody figure out what shoe is for them without having to be fully immersed in the culture and really having to dig in and know every little detail. You can just get the app and look at things and kind of figure out what you want from there. And so it's really important for us as Black people to be in these types of spaces because we're really influencers. People are looking up at us, whether we know it or not. There's somebody that's looking up to you and really wants to kind of follow in your footsteps. So David and I really take pride in being able to be two people that people can look up to and say, okay, like I can do this. This is an option for me. I can learn how to code. I can learn these business etiquettes and things like that. And then I can propel myself and my family, make a new situation for myself and my family to be able to go into these spaces. So, we're really happy to just be able to be in a position to let people know that this is a route that you can take in life. And so it goes really beyond sneakers. It goes beyond fashion. It's beyond all of that. It's really just about us being in a place to be able to propel our culture.
Yeah, it goes deeper. And it's always good to have those examples for people to look up to. Let's bring in now Jason Seals, an Oakland native and chair of African American Studies at Merritt College. Let's get a little bit into the history, Jason. President Ford officially recognized Black History Month in the 70s. Tell us more about the history and how February became the time to celebrate Black History Month.
Well, give thanks for having me. First and foremost, I think we have to acknowledge that Black History Month started off as Black History Week in 1926. Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded Black History Week. And really, it's actually a time to celebrate, reclaim, learn, and be present with our community. I think so much of our history, as it's taught right now, is very distorted, very misleading. And I think it's a time that's also a part of a larger, time period throughout the year that we're provide the opportunity to really teach and understand the true history. Arthur Schomburg, there's a library in his memory who said we have to restore the history of African people. And I think it's really important that a lot of the stories, narratives, history of African people starts off with trauma, pain, and violence. And I think when you restore the history, you talk about the contributions, you talk about the civilizations, you talk about the joy, the beauty, you offer more comprehensive story. So I think part of, in my job is really to provide a holistic understanding of the African experience, pre-slavery, pre-colonialism, and really get back to who are we before the madness, so to speak. And so that's really, when I see for this time period in this month, it's really about us reclaiming that space. I'll share this brief story. I had a conversation with one of my elders, and he actually remembers Black History Week. And he said to me, Black History Week was actually a time of resistance and a time of defiance. And he said, some of the things that Black people do in 2022, they take for granted that everyone couldn't do that. So wearing a t-shirt with a fist on it, that could get you lynched. And so some of the ways in which we kind of move without thought, we should be more thoughtful of and take advantage of these opportunities, not just to be present in this time, but also ensure that we are advancing this space and being thoughtful about what do we want to create, not just for this moment, but for our children.
I like how you put that too. It's kind of like not just focusing on that trauma, but also the triumphs as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And Greg Hodge is a candidate for mayor of Oakland. What do you see as the biggest priorities in your city, and particularly for the Black community?
Cool. Well, thank you for having us. I think it's a really important and timely conversation to have. I think here in Oakland, as we start a conversation around what makes us hopeful and where do we begin to heal, and how do we reimagine our own safety? How do we reimagine equitable economic opportunity? How do we reimagine sheltering, how we shelter? African Americans make up 75% of the folks who are in homeless encampments, which is about 4,000 people. And next week, there'll be the annual head count, if you will, for people who are living in tents under the freeway, folks who are living in doorways, folks who are living in the parks. And as an African American man, it's a moral outrage to me that we live in the wealthiest part of the wealthiest state in the wealthiest country in the world, and can build condominiums and sell them for $1 million plus. But we have not figured out a way to house our most vulnerable folks. Many of the folks, and Bob Jackson and others who've been working on these issues know, in East Oakland and West Oakland, some of those folks are working people. They wake up in the morning in a tent and go to work. They get their children off to school. And so for African Americans in this city, the fundamental fairness and the lack of equity in jobs, in business, in development and business development, the kind of people like Nicco. Nicco is an example of a young person who has been able to not only take whatever education he's had, but then have that entrepreneurial spirit. We owe that to our young people. And I think the importance of thinking about our history is that we've always produced business people. We've always produced educators. We've always produced craftspeople, but the story never gets told. You know, this week, we posted a story about William Shorey. William Shorey was an African-American businessman who owned ships during the 1880s, lived in San Francisco for most of his life, but then moved to Oakland, retired, became a philanthropist, hosted a dinner for Booker T. Washington to raise money for Tuskegee. Right here in Oakland, there's a street in West Oakland named after him. Most of our folks, young folks, older folks, have no idea that William Shorey lived in the 1880s in the Bay Area. So the history and the storytelling, particularly in this moment where there's this pseudo debate about critical race theory and what's going to be taught in schools and who's going to feel bad about the history, Black kids have been feeling bad about the story that's been told about us for generations. So obviously, it's time for us to tell, as Jason has said, that fuller history, that deeper history, that history of not only the challenges, but the accomplishments. And so I think here in Oakland, as we think about our schools, we've had a big debate about school closures, how we rethink schools to be the schools that our children and grandchildren need, and not the schools that our parents may have had. That's part of the challenge of leadership here in the city of Oakland. And so I'm looking forward, along with everybody else, to bring hope and healing back to the city, to bring our history to fore, but also to think about what's our future. When we think about the future of Black people, Black Future Month is what my daughter Shanaka calls it, that we ought to be thinking about how does our history inform how we go forward.
Yeah, kind of just rethinking a long list of things. Thank you for that. I'd like to bring Brandi Summers in now. You've written a book called Black in Place, and you refer to the spatial aesthetics of race in a post-chocolate city. That grabs your attention there for sure. Tell us what you mean by that exactly.
Thanks again, Len, for having me and the rest of us. So the book I wrote was focused on Washington, D.C., kind of the first chocolate city, which ended up being an adopted home for me. I'm from Oakland. I was born at Altabate, so technically born in Berkeley, but then raised in Oakland, and then have, you too, most recently have been able to come back and teach at UC Berkeley, where I've been able to do a lot of work really kind of not only exploring personal histories with, a migratory pattern of my family coming from Louisiana to San Francisco to Oakland, and recognizing how Black people are still here. And so in the book, I was talking about the ways that whether it's local governments or developers or investors of all kinds didn't create conditions to keep Black people in cities. Instead, they were using the Blackness of our culture as an aesthetic, as something that you could put on or take off or color on a wall, but weren't creating conditions like many of the ones that Greg mentioned to keep us in place. And so it was really kind of thinking about how Black cities like a DC, and then at the end of the book, I start talking about Oakland. Black cities like Oakland were having these instances where diversity ends up taking over rather than us focusing on the Blackness that really created such a rich and meaningful history here. So I think, as I move on and continue to do more work, it's really kind of in the spirit of Black History Month and thinking about, trying to celebrate all of those elements that often get hidden. It's really kind of a time to reflect on accomplishments that are garnered by Black people, but also to focus on those everyday, life-affirming practices and histories. It doesn't have to be those things that stand out the most. It's literally how people can just function every day, right? So if we can figure out how to honor those people, and again, those invisible histories, I think it can be really important to demonstrating the ways that Black people, and again, this understanding of Blackness is so meaningful to our lives today.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that as well. I want to bring in Tamearra Dyson now. She's the executive director. She is a business owner in Oakland. This year's theme for Black History Month is Black Health and Wellness. You've been a leader on that front. How important is it to you to be able to serve in that capacity and to help people pretty much stay healthy, especially now during the pandemic?
I think that, we've gratefully become somewhat of a landmark in the community, which I'm so grateful for. I think my initial thought was to create a gathering space around food that I believed in, which is vegan. My family is from Louisiana. And so I gravitated towards the Louisiana Creole cuisine. But I think more so it was an offering of myself. Again, it's what I believe in. It's how I live. And gratefully, it took a lot of teaching, a lot of time, building that relationship with the community for them to trust us enough to come in and give us a try and then become loyal, guests and friends. It's extremely important to me, what you put in your body directly affects the way that you think. And I know that when you feel better, then you think better. And if you're thinking better, then you do better. And kind of, us as individuals, as we are becoming better ourselves, then we do better for our community, whether it be a compliment to someone that can change someone's day or how they feel about themselves, or just kind of being an effective participant in your community in a positive light. So, I'm very grateful for the space that we hold. I take it, to heart. I take it very seriously. Our ingredients are fresh. The way that we do things are a lot more labor intensive because we make everything from scratch, again, with fresh ingredients. So the goal was never financial gain, more so offering myself in this way to the community. And I'm just so grateful and thankful that we've been able to build a solid relationship with Oakland, which is where I'm from. I'm from the Bay Area, primarily Oakland. I also lived in Berkeley as well, but it's a staple for me. My grandfather came here when he was 18 from Louisiana and started a landscaping company. So I got my work ethic from my grandfather and my mother. I'm just grateful that I was able to apply those lessons to Souley Vegan and kind of create this beautiful gathering space where you see all cultures and people enjoying one cuisine.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of those, what people might view it as a small thing, whether it's a compliment or even what you eat, but they really make a big difference.
it makes a huge difference how you feel in the morning, how you start your day, how you go to sleep at night. All of this is relevant. When we talk about health, I'm one that incorporates every aspect of the human body and spirit and mind. And I believe that what you eat and what you drink directly affects your spirit. It affects your train of thought. So if we can begin to kind of little by little, hopefully have the goal to become better versions of ourselves, what you consume is very much relevant.
And feel free, any of you, to chime into this question. What are some of the unique challenges you faced as a Black leader in the community, and how have you maybe overcome those challenges?
I would say for myself, I started Souley Vegan with no capital, pretty much. No one would take a chance on me. So I think capital was the initial, very, very difficult to start a business and then maintain it and then grow it, just kind of with the money that you have in your pocket. So I think that no one was willing to take a chance on me with regards to loans or grants or anything. So I bet on myself, but capital was definitely the giant that I had to slowly but surely chop down, little by little, and we were able to do it.
Yeah. Then I would say that, and probably this might be true for all of us in some way or another, that the challenges of leadership are the same challenges that our community faces writ large. And I would say that the racism, whether it's structural racism or institutional barriers to success, personally mediated racism, which is what happens between individuals and people's assumptions about us as leaders, as people, as neighbors, and then the internalized racism, that we buy into a story that the white supremacist culture teaches us about ourselves, that we're not worthy, that we need to take a back seat. And I found it, in some of our work when I was on the school board, trying to convince African-American kids that being well-educated was not being white, that being well-educated was actually in the traditions of the best of us, in the traditions of a Dr. Carver, in the traditions of Ida Jackson, who's the first Black teacher in the city of Oakland, in the state of California, actually. She taught him in Clyman's High School. So I think that when we see the lack of resources, the lack of infrastructure in a community, and we're trying to teach our kids to do the right thing, make the right choices, to be entrepreneurs, to be teachers, that not having the access to college money, not having the access to good primary education in many of our schools. So I think that the challenge of leadership really mirrors the challenges of being Black in America. And we know who we are. We know what we can do. We know what how worthy we are. But being in majority situations, in situations where white folks in particular white men in particular have controlled the narrative, makes it that much harder for us to do what we do. But at the same time, we are resilient and persistent. We're not ever giving up on who we are. And so I think for me, that's the way I think about the challenge of leadership in this city.
And just to build on that really quickly, I agree with everything that you said, Greg, especially as it relates to structural challenges. So I think so many things are attributed to individual behavior when oftentimes it's not. It's structural racism that has really perpetuated and continues to exist, that prevents opportunities from coming about, and then also that stop these kids from being able to do so many things or having even an imagination to know what they could do. And I know that personally, just in terms of your first person to go to college, grad school, etc. So you're walking into these environments where you're in school with people who've had generations of folks and multiple friends and family members who've had access to not only capital, but just access to information. And so it's as if, we're moving through life, learning as we can and grabbing on, but also trying our best to give back. So it ends up being the challenge of structure that we run up against often, But yes, we are resilient, we're creative, we adapt. There are so many ways that we produce and then others take. And so we just keep reproducing again. So I think in large part, honestly, thinking about, I love Souley Vegan. So thinking about eating more healthy, I agree. But our health oftentimes, pollution, Greg was talking a little bit earlier about West Oakland, thinking about the asthma rates in the city, at least Oakland, are highest in West Oakland. All of these other ailments are impacting us where it ends up being structurally based, where it's environmental, it's economic, there's some cultural elements, but we really have to kind of push through those things as we've continued to do over the years.
And yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that, just to say that from that structure, more specifically comes something like, and this is true for me, is, assumption, which leads to expectation. So there's an assuming that of my behavior, my action, my decision making based on what I look like, who I am, or based on where they're coming from and their point of views are, about what kind of leader I would be, in any given situation. And really, as a Black woman, I have to figure out how to respond to those things. And over the time I've had, and especially now as I'm getting a little bit older, I respond more with honesty and transparency and the equivalent in expectation of others, right? So that high standard, but more obviously more broadly learned and based, because as Black people, we have to kind of learn the whole scope, right? Where people, people who are not of color are learning, a scope, right? Of capability, understanding of a people. And so I feel like assumption gets in the way. Really specifically, we assume so much about each other, and people assume so much about what our capabilities are, and that just leads to a lot of faulty thinking in the end.
Len, I want to uplift two things really quickly. The two things I want to uplift in terms of struggle is, one, my department, African American Studies, comes from the legacy and the efforts of students and community leaders that were very thoughtful about quality of life of African people. And so the Panthers, advocates, teachers, mamas, big mamas, cousins, they were very thoughtful about the curriculum to enhance the quality of life. Is deeper than just going to class. So that's like part of the torch that I've been given, is to make sure that our department continues that we're bettering the quality of life. So it's deeper than you come in and getting a grade, right? We're giving people tools on how to navigate. And one of the things we've learned is that when you learn about yourself, you also do better in college. There's research around that. And the other thing that to couple with that is that there's a narrative that if you're Black, you don't need to learn about your history. I've had students say, well, I'm Black, why need to take an African American Studies course? And then they come into the course and they begin to hear about their history. And then they're upset because it's, well, how come no one ever taught me this? I didn't know this was a part of my reality. But then they feel affirmed and validated and supported and seen. And I bring in food into my class. So they always know they're gonna have some food to eat. So it's a community experience. And so part of my job is not to just carry on that legacy of the Panthers and students and advocates, but also help our students to see the value in themselves and help them to understand that with this, you could be an attorney, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an entrepreneur, whatever you want to be. But part of this is essential, that you're reclaiming who you are by being in these spaces. And it's a humbling job to have, because I get to partner with students, right, on their journey. And so I'll uplift those two things. And I feel like when we understand our value, then we also begin to celebrate Black History Month very differently than what we do right now.
Yeah, I love that you focused on the value and the quality of life, both so very important. Of course, so many of us remember those images, George Floyd being murdered, and then the protests that follow. It's been a year since those protests. Have we made any progress since then? I know it's been a short time, but did we get to a turning point, do you think?
Pastor Bob's been trying to get in. I think you're muted, brother. We can't hear you. Pastor Bob, you're muted.
Maybe that's what the problem is. Sorry about
That's
that.
what you're proud of. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir, Greg. Thank you. No, but I just want to just go back just a moment on the Black History bit. I first learned about Black history, my Black history, our Black history from Merritt College. And I think it was the beginning of Black history being put in Merritt College because we had a lot of Black things going on, Black Student Union. We had the Black Panthers. We had Black, we just had a lot of Black people coming together at Merritt, Grove Street, Merritt, not the sophisticated one on the hill, but Grove Street. And where we had the people from the neighborhood there. And I hated the fact that they moved it to the hill. But anyway, it was accessible to us and we learned a lot. I learned Black history from a Greek man, and Daskarolis was his name, George Daskarolis. And George Daskarolis knew more about Black people than I knew about myself. He taught us from slavery to freedom. John Hope Franklin was our textbook. And I'm telling you, he didn't bar any punches. He pulled that thing. But Black history for me, I tell you, it caused me to be angry. And it caused me to be bitter. And it caused me to almost, and that's why I thank the Lord he saved me. I almost became a racist because of it, because I had begun to hate white folks when I started finding out the truth of how they did Black people, and then turn around and say today, we don't know what's wrong with Black people. You lying. You know exactly what's wrong with Black people. You're the ones who caused us to be the way we are by subjecting us to things, inhumane treatments and all kind of, things that people don't like to go through because it's hurtful. It hurts so bad to go back and review your history, but you have to endure the hurt to understand where we are today, okay, and to do something about it. So that helped me in one way, but in another way, it kind of caused me so much pain to realize how my women were treated, how my men were treated, and how men were not considered men, they were considered boys. And slaves were considered chattel. We weren't human and kind of thing. So you could be treated any kind of way. My point of saying it is today, when you look back at it, there's so many things built into our system, which causes a lot of that stuff to continue. I call it systematic racism, where you think that one episode or one scene with George Floyd, with the white police officer with his knee on his neck until he died, you think that one thing is going to cause them to change, and Black Lives Matter and all the fallout that we had behind it. You think that's going to change something that's systematic, that's built into the system, where third grade kids in the Black community don't get the education that they need, can't even read, but they're promoted to middle school. And by the time they get there, they drop out because they're not prepared for middle school or high school, and they never graduate. 60% of Black boys were not graduating from the schools here, inner city schools in Oakland, and nobody thought it was a problem. The other thing that it caused me to grieve about, those who do make it through, those who do benefit by the system and whatnot. Sometimes, and I'm talking about Black people, sometimes they turn into a problem with the Black community because it's kind of, well, I made it. Well, they ought to be able to make it too. They're just lazy. And I'm really like, you know what? Just because they got this token sitting up there, anyway, you don't really want me to get into it because I'm telling you, the thing is so systematic. It's built into our system. And a lot of people I don't even see what I don't see what the problem really is. You don't see it because it's not that obvious to you, because it doesn't impact you in a negative way the way it does the Black community. So the things that we're looking at in our community, even today, Black young boys shooting up, killing up Black young boys right in the city of Oakland, had 134 homicides last year, and on our way to an even higher rate this year in the city of Oakland, not only in Oakland, but Chicago, New York, we got St. Louis, any major city across LA, the same problems are existing. How can the same problems exist throughout the whole entire country of America? I tell you how it is, because it's a systematic racism that's built in that no one really wants to deal with, because this is the way we always did things. Well, it's time now to do things differently. Let's equal the playing field. Let's make sure that our inner city kids have the same opportunity to be educated as the ones that live in the hills. Let's bring in people that are not substitute teachers. Let's bring in some real teachers who look like the community. And I'm advocating for more Black graduates from college come back and teach in the inner city school, Black kids, because we can relate. We can speak the language. We know, because many of us have come through the same places where these kids are today. So I think as we work together, instead of in silos, this group over here, this group over there, this Black group over there, but not willing to work together for for whatever peanuts the system is giving you to function. My point of saying is we need to come together for the shalom of our entire community, for the shalom of all of our people, and to make sure that we as a people, Black people, and not apologizing the fact that I'm Black and I'm working with my Black people to make Black people better. I don't think you need to apologize for that. I think that's well overdue.
Yeah, Mr. Jackson, I was going to add real quick, Mr. Jackson, you brought up a really good point. These things have been happening for a while. These incidences have been happening for a while, but now we're able to see them because of technology, smartphones, things like that. But it's been happening. And I'll say the one good piece I see out of all of this is really being able to start these conversations with our non-Black peers. We're able to really start talking with them about these things. They're able to see what's happening, what's been happening, and it's put right in front of them so they can't ignore it at this point. They have to have these conversations with us to understand what we're going through, because even in the workforce and things like that, people aren't realizing what Black people go through. They're really oblivious to it. And now we have a chance to really just show them kind of, this is what we've been living through for a long time in silence. Now it's not in silence, it's right in the light. And we can have these conversations so they can be educated and really understand our lives through our lenses. And that's where the real evolution starts, just through knowledge.
And I would add to it, and I appreciate the comments so far, this notion of systemic racism and how the idea that Michelle Alexander talks about in New Jim Crow is that the forms of social control to control Black bodies, to control Black minds, to control Black spirit have been with us from the founding of the country. And so until there's like a real reckoning, the way that South Africa had to have a truth reconciliation conversations around apartheid, until there's a real reckoning, you're going to continue to have the variations of what we saw happen to George Floyd. Nicco is right. What Nicco said is what we were all saying when Rodney King was beaten in Los Angeles in 1992, that it was because a camera was there. Because we've known about this. The country has known about this, right? It's interesting we asked a question about George Floyd, because in Minneapolis, only less than a month ago, Amir Locke was killed at home. And this is interesting around gun ownership. A registered gun owner, a no-knock warrant, police officers in the middle of the night kick in his door and then shoot this young man, right? I was on the phone with a friend of mine who's a foundation leader in Minneapolis, and the sadness in her voice as we talked about this, because when George Floyd got killed, then the country said, oh, Black Lives Matter. Foundations started putting billions of dollars into Black funds. Corporate America had statements and pronouncements about how we need to do better. So the question becomes, how do we change the systems? Brendan Woods, who is our chief public defender, has a really good sense of this, because what he says is not just about changing on the street law enforcement, because we want law enforcement that works for us, not against us, right? But we should start with this premise of economic opportunity. We should start with mental health services. We should start with social services, making sure that young people, as Dr. Bob Jackson just talked about, have an opportunity to learn, opportunity to grow, opportunity to get the guns out of our community. And so when we think about George Floyd, let's put that in the context of Amir Arbery. Let's put that in the context of Sister Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor. The list goes on. You could start with Emmett Till and come forward and have the same kind of stories that have happened to us. So the question becomes, as a country, are we willing to change? Are we really willing to say that Black lives do matter? Because, and I saw a tagline on a piece that Black Lives Matter put out, I think it was on a Super Bowl commercial, but it said, all lives won't matter until Black lives matter. And so I think that notion of changing the system, as Brendan has said, not just law enforcement, but the DAs, the grand jury system, our system of how we pick juries, the entire system, how judges are selected and sit on a bench. Those are part of a bigger system that we have to pay attention to if we're really serious as a country about making change.
Len, I would say this. I think it's really important that we all redefine our front line. What is your front line? And what is your role in the healing and liberation of African people? I think this is a question we have to ask. So we have Dr. Bob Jackson here, and being, like a pillar in this community. His work is instrumental, right? Greg Hodge, his role and leadership is instrumental, right? Right, like what Brandi is doing at UC Berkeley is instrumental, right? Everyone on here has a role. And I think when we understand our role, we can leverage that to support healing and wellness. So for me, I do a lot of teaching. I'm in my community. I've worked in mental health, education, youth development. However, when George Floyd happened, my most important role was being a father. Right. So me redefining my front line is making sure my 8-year-old son understand what it means to be a Black boy, what it means to be a Black boy living in Oakland, what it means to love himself, what it means to know his community, right? And also understand what it means to navigate, right? So I would say that not much has changed, but I would encourage us to redefine our front line because we are the change. Right? We can't expect white America to change. We have to be the change to galvanize, heal, and liberate our community.
Just want to
Yeah, I
jump
agree with that. I mean, I think that for me, also a parent, my first job is to my son over George Floyd and letting him know what's up and really teaching him what it means to love himself, like you were saying, Jason. And I think as a leader at Children's Fairyland, one of the things that I really thought about over the George Floyd period is giving people, I mean, to me, it's like, is this the 500-year awareness campaign, right? Because it feels like now that we've come to this place of social media, which I think, Nicco, you were mentioning, where things are just more widely seen, absorbed, inhaled, there's just a lot more awareness. And so what we do with that is now the implementation campaign, right? So it's like, what happens now? And I think that goes back to what Jason is saying is what is your individual responsibility? What is your role? What is that definition? And at Fairyland, for me, it's my job. Fairyland has been here 71 years as an institution in Oakland. And when I get on and when I hear people say, I'm not using Fairyland because it's not a place for me. 9% of the stories that are told within Fairyland in terms of being a storybook theme park are European in nature. You're embedded in a white neighborhood. I don't feel safe or comfortable, recreating with my family there. So it's my job to break down those kinds of barriers for Black people and all people of color, as this institution is supposed to be representative and a safe harbor oasis for all families and their little people. So for me, that's my role right now. That's my role. How can I make sure that Black people know that they have a place here with their young ones?
Do you feel that's a heavy burden, though? Do you feel like it's our responsibility to educate others just about the importance of our history and just our place here?
No. So to answer firmly, I do think, along with a lot of what's been said already, that ultimately we need to arm ourselves with this information. And what ends up happening is when we do take the role or the position of teaching others, they tend to manipulate it anyway. And so really people attempt to shift a narrative to fit their own stories. And so in a lot of ways, as we think about, again, going back to Jason's language of, our front line, right? Thinking about where we stand and what our contributions are. It's more so, yes, to teach our children, to teach children that their friend, my daughter's here, my 8-year-old is here right now. She hears a lot. She hears what I say unfiltered constantly. And I want her to understand who she is, where she is, and to be able to be comfortable with what's going on. So, even going back to thinking about not only George Floyd, but, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, countless other names that have come up since then and prior to then. In the same point that we're having this COVID-19 pandemic, Black people are dying, Black people are getting sick, right? So we have these twin crises happening in addition to, again, a lot of environmental elements, right? So it's not as if the trauma has ended, but it's more so recognizing that, yes, we have to figure out how to heal ourselves first, and then people will follow suit regardless. So even understanding our role in these institutions, and yes, I agree with what Greg was saying earlier in terms of recognizing the institutional biases, or at least those ways that we need to shift them. At the same time, we need to understand those institutional histories. So there are some people that don't want law enforcement at all because we recognize that the actual institution of law enforcement in this country was coming from slave patrols, it's coming from black codes, it's coming from ways to contain, arrest, and in a lot of ways kill black people. So how can we build a community and coalition with an institution, again, not individuals, but an institution that was originally there to capture us, to kill us, to maim us, to stop us. So it's really rethinking how we're supposed to kind of get up every day and function in this world. It's doing this important work and making those important choices. And again, it wasn't until I had a child that I really kind of shifted what my role was, what my responsibility was in teaching and letting people know and undoing these stories that people are being told about themselves and imagining a different possibility for a future.
Yeah, I really love what Jason said about kind of recognizing the part that you play. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, how do I highlight that? How do I do more of that? And I think that Souley Vegan has been a platform for the community to come down and have dialogue. When George Floyd happened, I was giving away free food. I said, come down, talk to me, let me hear your feelings. I normally don't lay my eyes on footage like that because it kills me at that moment. I do have a son, he's 27. You know, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. And we know that this has been happening as long as we all can remember. The part that I realized that Souley Vegan helped me realize that I play is to connect with not only the youth, but just each other. And let's have some dialogue. How do you feel? Are you okay? It sounds like a cliche, but are you okay? I've had young Black girls work for me that, you know, was considering suicide. One tried to commit suicide. Her family allowed me to talk to her. And I said, I hope you come back to work, and not just to work, but to build. Let's rebuild whatever is happening inside you that you think that there's no hope. Well, she did come back to work, and I sat down with her and we had a conversation. And when I shared with her my history, first I asked her, I said, do you think I'm successful? And she said, well, yeah, Miss Dyson, you have all these awards and da-da-da. And I said, and when I shared with her my history, because we were the same, we shared a lot of the same experiences. She was so shocked at that. And I said, what you see now is not the way it's been. I said, you fail a class, then you take it again. You know, I had trouble in elementary and middle school, you know, and then I dropped out of school in high school and then chose to go back, get my associates. I was on the road to nursing, but I didn't have my basics in order. So I told her, I said, failing classes, yeah, I've done a lot of that. But then I went back and I took them again. But just, I think there's a language that's being spoken now within the community that giving up is such an easy option. And to kind of open up that dialogue about mental health. And a lot of it comes from trauma that we don't talk about, or that we feel like we can't talk about, or that no one would understand, but we're really all the same. We have so many similarities. And I think the more that we express ourselves as leaders in the community and to teach that we are the same, we have the same, a lot of similarities in our background. You can be okay. We can do this. I can help you. It just opens up a different platform for us to begin to heal. Because a lot of us, I believe, are indeed broken and we just don't know how to get up.
You know, listening to everybody, and I certainly appreciate all of the comments and all of you that are on the panel. But, you know, I just, my mind went back just briefly to Camel Village when I was growing up. You know, in the 60s, I remember when you walk down the street and you saw another Black person, you say, hey, brother, how you doing? Or you see a black woman, hey, sister, how you doing? But for some strange reason, Nowadays, you go to say hello to somebody, they look at you like you're speaking some foreign language or something. I mean, our community. What I would love to see, and I think would benefit all of Black people in the Black community, is that we start loving one another. And somebody already said it, before you can love other people, you really have to love yourself. And where I come from, before you can love yourself, you have to love God. So God says to love him with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So it's obvious that he never talked about you loving yourself from the beginning, but the relationship with God, which Black people always had a belief in God. And I don't know why we've gotten way away from it with all kind of stuff now, but we've gotten so far away from God. And to me, that's where the love starts. But that love for self is so important. And then you come back and it's easy then to love other people. And like I said, I was overseas in the Air Force. I spent 3 years, 11 months, 24 days, and 13 hours in the Air Force. And I want you to know, even overseas in England, Germany, Africa, where I went, when you saw another Black military person, it was, hey, brother, how you doing? Hey, brother, how you doing? And the point of it is, we were never strangers with one another. But now, these Black young people growing up in the community, they like, you speak to them and they look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. And almost a lot of the young inner city boys carrying guns and shooting. Some kind of way we don't like to have a real dialogue about our own community and talk about those things that are really pertinent. We got single, beautiful women that are raising their children on their own. Now they didn't get that child by themselves. Where's the man at? Where's the father? Where's the husband? Where's our family structure? 78% of our Black families now are led by single women with children. And the point of it is, they need a lot of help. My hat goes off to women that are left now to raise the kids by themselves, run the family. They have to go make the money to buy the bacon, then bring the bacon. Bacon may not be a good thing to say in front of a vegan woman. I'm sorry. The lettuce, bring the tomatoes, the lettuce and tomato home, and then cook the food, and then make sure the house clean, make sure they're doing their homework. And then they say, these mothers don't make the kids go to school. They don't they're busy working, thanks to Clinton. Anyway, I won't get into all of that, but the point I'm saying is we have a responsibility for ourselves and quit looking for other people to solve our problem. We are the people that need to solve our own problem. We can start off by, first of all, loving ourselves and then loving everybody else, especially those who look like you. Go out of your way to speak. Hey, man, how you doing? Sometimes I speak to guys on the corners. I walk by, hey, fellas, how you doing? And they just look at me as if, I don't know you. Why are you speaking to me? I have to go back and say, hey, I said, how you doing? And all of a sudden, okay, fine. It's just shocked that I would take a moment to talk to them. My point in saying it is, our community is ready for love. And I think if we show more love with ourselves, we're so concerned about what the other man will do for us. Question for me is, what can we do for ourselves? We can do a lot. When I look at all the inventions, I got a book on inventions that Black people did and never got credit for the inventions. George Carver, Washington Carver, took a peanut, amen, and I know Skippy didn't have anything to do with peanut butter, okay? I just know that. The point of it is a whole lot of things that Black people have done, and you can never tell me a white man, a general colonel from Kentucky could ever fry a piece of chicken that people would buy. I just would not believe that. There was somebody in that kitchen back there who looked like me and you, amen, that was throwing down with that chicken, and he decided he could make him some money off of it. And for $50, got that 11 herbs and spices, whatever else. Anyway, I don't want to go into all of that, but that's the kind of thing, even with Famous Amos with those chocolate chip cookies, next thing you know, Famous Amos is out of business, so it's not Black anymore. A white company bought it. You look at BET, it's not Black anymore. It's white. So they show you what you need to see. And 100 Black men, I'm a part of the organization as well. They say what you see is what you be. That's one of their mantras. What you see is what you be. So if I see Black people cutting it up, kicking it, I see the women just, twerking and all of that. I see all that. I'm like, my God, is that our community? Is that our community? And I'm not knocking the rappers and whatnot, but some of the stuff they're saying, some of the stuff they're putting in the minds of our young people is criminal. It's just criminal. And as far as the advance, so my point is, we need a real dialogue with our community about what's really going on with our community that's causing our community. These young folks going out here shooting people, killing them with guns. They're not doing that just because they don't have anything else to do. They're doing it because they're hurting. And hurting people hurt people. We need to get to the bottom of that and show more love, I think, in our community. Forget about what other people are doing. Let's go ahead and do what we need to do and get our communities together. That's my bottom line on the whole thing.
Yeah, love, such a simple thing, but complex as well. Thank you for that, Bishop Jackson. I want to wrap up with this and ask all of you to chime in on this. What does Black history mean to you personally?
Somebody said, if you don't know your past, you certainly won't understand your future. And I'd like to think that, our history is so rich, so precious. Like I said, Merritt College was such a blessing to me. George Dascarolas had to have a Greek man to teach. That was before Mrs. Huntington took over the Black history department. But the point of it is, Merritt College introduced that in college. And I want you to know that was the beginning of me understanding about the people, my people, and where we really come from. And that we are not what the system has depicted us as. We're not that. We're great, wonderful, beautiful people that God made in his own image. And we need to just have that message. So that's what I get out of it.
I think that in my life, Black history admittingly was not a huge celebration for me. I believe that, again, kind of going back to what Jason said and Bishop Jackson, I think a lot of our youth are very much detached. So I think that when we do get to a point, or when they do learn of older civilizations that did these great things, I think that the information is phenomenal and eye-opening. But I think that the mindset has changed, I think, so much over these years. And then even in the past 10 years, these kids are nothing like I've ever seen. Very much detached, very much in the now. And I think that with that being said, going back to our roles and making sure that we're connecting with our community is extremely important. And for those that teach Black history, it's relevant, it's important, it's essential. And then also coupled with that, demonstrating now what greatness looks like.
Yeah, I would say for me that Black History Month represents a starting point. It's a starting point that should just be ever present, right? It's a great start. On one side, it's a source of pride, a place of pride, focused attention, learning, and history for us. On the other side, it's an opportunity for exposure and learning for others. And so it's a starting point of a journey that we should all be taking, and and not just taking one moment to celebrate, right? For me, it's a starting point.
I'd say that I think back to the fact that it was Gerald Ford who kind of recognized, or it was the first sitting president to recognize Black History Month. But really, Black History Month after Negro History Week was advocated by Black students at Kent State in the late 60s. And so if we think about, how radical the politics and specifically Black politics were at that time, I imagine that Black History Month kind of comes from that fire. And so Black History Month, I guess for me, isn't necessarily an opportunity. It is an opportunity to teach, certainly those hidden and invisible histories. But at the same time, I think it's an opportunity to kind of hunker down and figure out how we're going to move forward. So it ends up being where we might have Black History Month, but it's really in practice like a Black History Year, right? So it's the start. If January is the beginning of the year, we have February to really think through the rest of the year. So that's really what it is for me, and coming from a place of growth and movement forward. So that's it.
Great. It's great.
Len, I'm a teacher 365 days a year. I'm a tenured instructor. In every job that I've had, even outside of education, I've been a teacher. And so it's not even a profession, it's my calling, it's my purpose. However, during the month of February, I get called from various organizations, various institutions, various radio stations to do this work. And so for me, Black History Month is really me being called on to carry on the legacy of my ancestors. And so for me, I'm always very thoughtful about what am I saying, what information I'm sharing, what message I'm leaving with people. For me, sometimes it feels like a lot of work because sometimes I want to go to the event. I want to learn. However, I recognize that I've been chosen, something greater than me. And so I'm just very humbled that I get to do this work. But I feel like for me, it's to carry on the legacy of my ancestors.
And on that topic of ancestors and family, I think, first of all, Black History Month is very, very important for young people. But it's also a time where young people can learn about their own family and their own Black history. So I've been taking it upon myself to really go back and learn about where I came from, go back generations and make sure, one, that information isn't lost, because information can be lost in translation. You want to make sure your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, all of those people are remembered, because each incremental person has led to all of us being able to sit here right now. And if it wasn't for each of those people doing exactly what they did, how they did it, none of us would, even individually, we would not be here right now. So it's important to make sure our own Black history is passed down generation to generation. And we, especially as young people, can understand where our family came from and how we got to this point. And then we can better appreciate where we're from. We can better appreciate what we're capable of doing. And then you can even look backwards and say, wow, if my great-great-grandfather was able to do this to these situations, why am I complaining about the situation I'm in right now? I should be able to put my head down, do what I got to do, and propel my people, my family, and just make life better for everybody.
Yeah, I would add to it too. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate what everybody has said in terms of why this history is important. And two quotes come to mind. People without a knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. It was something that Marcus Garvey said. And if we are not anchored in our history, then we really don't know the direction that we're heading in. That Sankofa bird out of West African culture is a bird that, the image is a bird that's looking backwards in order to be able to go forward. So all throughout our history, not just our history in the Americas, but throughout our history on the African continent, Brazil, Caribbean, wherever we've been, telling our own story that inspires us, that gives us information about what's possible, as Nicco just said, that explains us even when we make mistakes, even when our history should also tell us when we haven't been great. It should give us a sense of like how not to repeat those mistakes. You know, Malcolm said it, you know, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. That notion of, you know, whatever field you're in, if you're in culinary arts, if you're in children's enrichment, like at Fairyland, if you're writing books for academia, if you're preaching on Sunday mornings, whatever it is that history ought to be able to inform and inspire how we go forward. And in your business, Len, you know, there's the cliche that goes, you know, if you don't like the news, go out and make some. If you don't like the history, go out and make some. You know, that's I think the fundamental thing that's important to me about Black History Month is that it's my responsibility to make some history, that my children and Jason's son and the parishioners at Axville Gospel and wherever the folks who eat food at Souley Vegan, we have to make history so that when our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren look back, they can say, well, granddad was actually about the business of doing something in the world. That they didn't leave the world. And this goes to something that Bob Jackson said. It goes to that notion of like, we were taught in the South. I grew up in Arkansas. We were taught to leave your community more beautiful, more beneficial than when you inherited it. So our job is to make some history that our children's children, 7 generations out, will be proud to tell, and that inspires them to do for their children.
And on that note, we're going to wrap things up. I really appreciate all of your time and all of your perspective during this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Len.
Thank you.
Thanks, Len.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.
It was a pleasure.